Delighted to introduce Professor Tom Smith, who is one of the leading finance academics. Many journals rank him as #1 in this part of the world. Not only is a leading researcher, but he's also a great mentor. Not only is he prolific in research, his students are prolific as well. He's got over 50 PhD students to completion who have all published in many top-tier journals. I can't count them because they keep increasing by the day. So without further ado, I would request Tom Smith to start his talk. We are delighted to have him here and enjoy the talk and put in your questions. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chandra, for such a wonderful, thank you, Chandra, for such a wonderful introduction. And of course, I can't start without thanking Bala, who is an unsung hero in finance academia. And he deserves great recognition for all that he contributes to academia, not the least of which is this fabulous conference that he originated. So thank you very much, Bala. I'm going to share my screen. Feel free to ask questions at any time through the talk. Now, are you okay? Can you see the slides? The presentation okay?
Yes, I can see it.
I see the chat. Yep.
We can see it. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the topic here is political connections and the transition to low carbon sources in China, evidence from a quasi-natural experiment. As you know, Martina Lindeluca and I have tried to establish a field of environmental finance, and we're lucky enough to get along two experts in political connections to help us with this natural experiment, and that's John Lee Han and Jing Shi, and we're very, very happy to have them on board. So the bottom line about what this talk is about is, do political connections facilitate the transition to low carbon energy, period, but the experiment is set in China, just because it was a natural experiment there. So we used hand-collected evidence on political connection from the resumes and executives, resumes of executives and directors of the energy firms, and there was a natural experiment around the 2013 action plan on air control, prevention and control. In case we don't get to it, the findings are that politically connected low carbon energy firms after the enactment experienced a significant improvement in their operational performance, which is return on equity and return on assets. We find that immediately. We didn't expect to find necessarily improvement immediately, but maybe with a lag. And indeed, the lag occurred for the market value measure, Tobin's Q, and that took 3 years before that showed up as being increasing significantly. So what's the background? Why do we want to look at this? Well, Hong et al. Have this very interesting paper that says that markets and wealth have been driven by technological breakthroughs over time. And there's only been 8 of them, like rail, car, aeroplanes, microelectronics, the internet, biotechnology, and I've left out a couple, but now it's actually clean technology. You'd think it'd be robotics, but when you look at the patents out there, it's clean technology that where all the patents are, and hardly any in robotics. So the transition to clean technology is really going to drag the markets. The opportunities here are going to drag the markets along to actually do something about the climate change issues, right? And Lindeluca et al. Have estimated that these patents, only 1% of the patents, if you just analyze them and allow for further development, research development, approval, and commercialization, will add over $20 trillion in value, and other bodies have come up with around that same value. So it's going to be a bigger increase in wealth and a bigger push to markets than fossil fuels ever was. And that sort of means that people are going to want desperately to be involved in this clean technology breakthrough. So, you know, we all know this happens, right? That you grease the political wheels. We see that in the scandals that erupt almost weekly, right? And even in Australian politics, right? And why? Why do you want to grease the political wheels? Well, there's a few things. You get, you know, it can lead to better access to finance, favorable tax treatment, helps you with the competition you face in markets. You get a government bailout when things are bad, and you get, you know, sometimes very important contracts and subsidies. There's a host of papers there. Bacchio was a friend of mine who was at Vanderbilt University, and she was one of the early people who looked at political connections in Italy, right? But you know, there's lots of papers, and it seems to show that these political connections are important, you know, all over the world. So the government support is a powerful force, right? They can either hinder you or facilitate these big periods of transitions, like this transition between technology. And what we're looking at is specifically how they affect the clean energy and fossil fuel sectors differently. And so we're focused on the war of pollution that China started in 2013. And we think that the exogenous nature of this event enables us to conduct a quasi-natural experiment. And those of you that were listening in for the session on endogeneity see that a lot of these things come to play. You can mark me on what I suggested in theory for good things to do. You know, so how do you identify the challenge, right? The challenge of identifying the channels. So we had to go and hand collect evidence of political connections from the resumes of the executives and the directors of the clean and emissions intensive Chinese firms. And then once we had that information, armed with that information, then we looked at the connections to operating performance and financial performance. We used a difference and diff methodology to investigate it pre and post the war on pollution. Energy firms, we got the Chinese A shares over the period 2009 to 2019. There was a classification of listed companies issued by the China Securities Regulatory Commission, and we identified the energy firms as emissions intensive. We then double checked manually according to the annual reports. And we ended up finding 120 unique firms in the emissions intensive sample. For the low carbon energy firms, we used the low carbon energy sector as classified by the wind database. That includes firms generating electricity from hydro, solar, wind, natural gas, or nuclear. And we might argue that that's clean energy or not, and clean coal technology. Yeah. And we manually checked it with the annual reports as well. And we only ended up here with 45. Obviously, it's emerging. Clean energy is an emerging field. Connections, we used Haberman's method, scrutinized the resumes of the executives and directors, collected CEO and chairman's bibliographic information from the CS-MAR database, and we cross-checked that with the firm's annual report, the website, and online search engines, and identified firms to be politically connected if its CEO or chairman had served as a chief executive or deputy chief officer at a county level in China and above. And we also used a secondary measure where we actually used a count of politically connected. So we'll talk about that later, robustness. The results that the politically connected low carbon energy firms after the war on pollution have higher operational performance, return on equity and return on assets 1 year after, and they have significantly higher financial performance, but that takes 3 years to eventuate. So robustness, we used a different measure, not just the dummy 0-1 for politically connected. We used the intensity of politically connected, so the log of 1 plus the number of politically connected. And further robustness, we also use propensity score matching to match the emissions intensive and non-emission intensive firms, and the results, all of the results are still held. So, future directions. Well, we think, you know, obviously the political connections work. We think it's very important for this transition to clean technology, just simply because of the amount of wealth that's going to be generated, and also just the political interest that has been shown. You know, I think the US might be the next place for researchers to look, right? Because there's been a lot of political, greasing wheels on both sides for the clean technology as well as the energy intensive. And I know you've all been going over for the other session, so this might be one where you get an early mark. So it depends on the questions. So I'm going to hand back to you, Chandra. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions. So I call on the audience to put in some questions for us. Tom, I'll ask the first one.
Sure, thank you, Chandra.
How do you characterize the political connections? Can you give us a bit more details on that?
Yeah, so it's whether they were at the chief officer or deputy chief at the county level in China, and the way we identify that is from the resume. So we can collect that data. So we're following pretty much accepted practice in the politically connected literature.
Can you tell us something about the channels through which they are earning these higher returns?
So we think it's by favorable contracts. Certainly not subsidies or bailouts, right? Because this is an emerging, so if you look at those channels I went through, it's more likely from not help with competition, because there's only a few firms. So we think it's more likely with favorable contracts. If you go back to the aviation industry, for example, there were two big competitors in Australia, right? One was Qantas, and the other was an airline that the CEO was the great Australian pilot, so Charles Kingsford Smith. But Qantas were very politically connected, and they got the mail contract, yeah, and that was that's the reason that Qantas is the airline and not the one which was generated by politically owned and operated by politically connected businessmen, and not Charles Kingsford Smith, which was an airline owned and controlled by the greatest aviator in the world. And there's an example of political connections really making a difference. Right? One firm that survived nearly 100 years, and the other that disappeared because it didn't have a reliable source of revenue.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Is there a difference between state-owned and private firms with political connections? Which one is more important?
So, yeah, we didn't specifically look at that, but that has been looked at a number of times. And yes, there is a difference, right? The state-owned, already sort of having, a leg in the politically connected and we probably haven't got enough firms for any of those clean energy firms to be state operated. Remember, it's a very emerging field, right, within technology.
Thanks, Tom. So I'll see if there are other questions from the audience.
So Bala will be making the slides for the talk and the recording from the talk available as well. And when we finish the paper, the final paper, we'll send that along to Bala so he can have everyone can have a link to that as well.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing your full paper and learning a lot about this. It seems to be a very interesting topic and very timely as well.
Yeah, it's hard to, you know, as we talked about in the endogeneity section, right, the panel this morning, it's quite hard to come up with these natural experiments. China is presenting a lot of opportunities, and you're seeing a lot of research on China appearing in the top journals, right, like the Journal of Political Economy, the American Economic Review, even the top strategic management journals, as well as the finance journals. Right? And our own Jing Shi has written a lot of these papers, right? And China is the scene is set in China because there's a lot of these exogenous shocks going on, and which give rise to natural experiments. Yeah, we're probably likely to see exogenous shocks in the US with this new administration around clean technology. So that will, you know, be research, you know, for a few years down the future, right, looking at that. That's why I suggested that the US would be a very interesting area to look at, because you know, with the old administration, you were seeing, you know, subsidies and bailouts for the old technology, you know, the fossil fuel technology, and with the new administration, you're likely to see you know, the subsidies disappearing, and you know, more contracts, etc., for clean technology. Okay, there's a few questions there now, Chandra.
Yep, there are a couple of questions around that. Yeah, can you see them?
Yep. You want to highlight them and ask them, or you want me to just go through them?
You can go through whichever order you like, your own priority.
Okay, I'll just go down from the top. They're in order. Okay. From Terry, we don't hear much about China's attempt to move to a green environment in Australia and elsewhere. So we don't, because our papers are dominated by a certain, with a certain flavour, right, which is very much fossil fuel intensive. China has a working emissions trading market and a commitment to net zero. So they are moving as only they can rapidly to greener. And you know, does it show up in Beijing, for example, in terms of the smog level? Yeah, of course not yet, but it will. So they're totally committed to the clean technology revolution. And why? Because they're going to make a lot of money out of it. Hamid asks, the intensity of political connections. It sounds like a measure. Yeah, I think probably in China, more than, you know, anywhere, right? Greasing the political wheels is very important, but we know it is here too, right? We probably just don't have the data here. We're able to get the data a little more cleanly from China. Praveen, I think, is logged in all the way from India. How are you going, my friend? How does the market? I think they just view them as smart, right? And you know, I think the market views, say, universities as stupid, right? Because universities just play one side of the political market, right? Which is essentially the left-leaning. And you know, a good smart corporation will play both sides of the political spectrum. So is ethanol a big thing in China? So Keith, you can see it's from the definition I gave of energy intensive versus not energy intensive. A lot of things that we strictly wouldn't regard as clean, like nuclear and carbon capture, right, are considered green. Ethanol, I don't know how that was included. I just don't know. It's certainly greener, but it has its own implications for the environment in terms of what's used to make the growing the things that are used to make the ethanol. So how do I think it's applicable to other countries' markets? I think that's really important, and that's why the further research. So the market is going to transition to clean technology. It was going to transition to clean technology under Trump, whether he wanted it or not. As you could see that the firms themselves were doing it and the states themselves were doing it. They're going to contribute. They're going to transition to clean technologies even faster now because the political wheels have been greased with the Democratic Party. In Australia, with the same thing. We're going to transition to clean technology regardless of the political leanings of the government. And you already see that New South Wales is doing that. Companies themselves are closing the coal-fired power stations. But change in government would really going to see greasing of the political wheels and possibly the shutdown of subsidies. So Ellie says, yeah. So I think in the US you've got a very good contrast, right? The government, the previous government was stymieing the take-up of clean technology and giving subsidies to the fossil fuel. And then you've got a really good break point with the election of the incoming government, which is likely to phase out the subsidies, the bailouts for the fossil fuels, and likely to be a lot better environment for the clean technology firms. So getting back to the endogeneity for the second part of Ellie's question is, so we just didn't do the estimation, right? We did what I suggested was the gold standard for endogeneity. Use the natural experiment. Now, we were a little lazy, unlike Hyde and Lindquist that got over 100. We only got one endogenous event, right? It's a lot better if we got 100 endogenous events and looked at what happened pre and post. But we've got the natural experiment, we've got a treated firm, and we've got untreated firms. So we can do the diff and diff. So Sean is asking about party membership. I'm not sure, Sean, but I think you either, I tell a story, Sean. Some of my students in America took me to the best steakhouse in New York City. And what's the company? Luger Steak, it's in Brooklyn. And one of the students said, can you bring us a menu? And the waiter said, sir, you order a porterhouse steak or we order you a taxi. So I think it's like that in China. There's, you either order the porterhouse steak or you disappear somewhere. But I might be insulting my Chinese friends. I hope I'm not. Now, we have, looking for the Chinese SOEs have better access to capital, also involved in green and reducing. So how are you defining any transition? Is it actual transition? No, it's whether their main enterprise is in the clean energy. But as I said, that also included nuclear and carbon capture. And Rachel, I think the same reasoning. I think the impact of political connection seems to hold up all around the world, right? So I told you about Mario Tapia's work with Italy, and that those papers were published in American Economic Review. And it seems to, if you look at all those references I gave you, it seems to show up all around the world. Possibly the government influence could be more profound in China because things happen quickly, right? With this war on air pollution. We saw from the time I started going to China about 15 years ago to now, we've just seen dramatic changes. One of the most profound changes that's ever occurred in the world history. When I first went to China, there was a couple of 100 million people that were like middle class, right? Like in Australia or the US. And then 1 billion people that were affectionately called, or not so affectionately called by the Chinese, the peasants, were the poorest people on earth. In that 15-year period, the whole of China has been lifted above the poverty level, yeah? Above the poverty level, according to the official definitions of the poverty level. That's not even true in Australia or the US. So it's been essentially an economic miracle. So when China turns its attention to something, and now a war on pollution, you're likely to see very dramatic results. So thank you, Rachel. So Dr. Jurdy, China's focused on economic growth and has become a driver in innovation green. What will be misused by focusing? Oh, of course, yeah. So what we're talking about is the second best equilibrium, right? The first best equilibrium is where the market, behaves like the Arrow-Debreu, general equilibrium, social welfare theorems, right? But we honestly just don't see those things in practice. So what we see is a second best equilibrium, and it's driven by who has the best political connections. As Ali's question showed, you got a benefit with the previous administration in the US of bailouts and subsidies if you're in the fossil fuel intensive industry. And now that's changed with the transition. India is doing wonderful work with transition, and why? The people there are very smart. There's money to be made. And are there political connections in India? I'm sure. I'm sure that they work, but each place they're going to work differently.
Tom, I have one further question.
Sure.
From an efficiency point of view, would you think that regulation by the government is better, or a market-oriented solution would be better?
So the market is definitely going to get us to a transition to clean technology, right? And the reason they're going to do that is the economic driver of this $20 trillion plus increase in wealth. But the market, doesn't care about rising sea levels or toxic pollution, right? They care about making that profit. So they're not going to move on the schedule according to the United Nations wishes of limiting the increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees or 2. The market's probably on a trajectory to fall within, say, a 3.5 degree increase in temperature. And whilst that's not so bad, right? We could probably stand a 3.5% increase in temperature in Sydney, right? That would make us a little bit more like Brisbane. But what we're likely to see is enormous volatility. And I don't know whether, you experienced, heavy wind or fire tornado, right? And they are terrifying things, right? They can just rip a house apart, throw a car into the, into the air. We're just going to see a lot more of these things, because of the volatility, not because the temperatures increase by that much, but that it shifts the whole distribution, right? And it's the extreme, I think, that we're worried about. We see the people in Cooper Pedy living underground, right, at 50-degree temperature, and they get on just fine, right? But if the temperature increases worldwide by 3.5 degrees, the ocean warms, the hurricanes increase, the cyclones increase, so the tornadoes increase, right? So as well as sea level rises that we're seeing. So there's lots and lots of consequences from that the market really doesn't give a damn about, right? They don't like to relocate. If they have to move out of New York, the headquarters out of New York and somewhere else, they don't like it. But it's only a small amount of money compared to what they're going to make. You know, and sometimes, you know, about valuation and real options, and that's really important in something like this. Sometimes delaying is optimal. In most cases, it's optimal, right? So they have different incentives. You know, they have profit-making incentives, not the incentive to save, you know, people inconvenience in the world.
Thanks, Tom. Very interesting presentation. Maybe we have just time for one, or maybe we are out of time already. Any further questions from the audience? Okay, there's one there from Terry Walter.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Twiggy Forecast, and he's the CEO of Fortescue Metals. He's actually an alumni of our Masters of Applied Finance at Macquarie. So they do a lot of work around the national environment. They do a lot of work around Indigenous employment. So he wants to, on an incredible scale, set up Australia as the world's sort of provider of clean energy, and he wants to do it through something, you know, through hydrogen, you know, making hydrogen from clean technology. And look, I think it's a great idea. At the moment, and I really believe in hydrogen, right? 90% of the universe is made of hydrogen, and you know, this is the universe as a whole, and the other 10% is hydrogen that's been turned into helium by the stars. So it just makes sense as a source of fuel. At the moment, the technology is not quite there. The efficiency is converting the solar into hydrogen, and then the efficiency of, you know, releasing the hydrogen and getting electricity. But as much as you can forecast, you know, technology, the forecasts are by the mid 2020, the technology will be there. It will be like $1.80 a kilogram for hydrogen. And of course, if you've got to take advantage of that, you've got to start now, right? And that's what Twiggy Forrest is doing. And look, he's no fool, right? He's no fool at all, right? And this could be, you know, incredible bet that he's made, and it puts him, his company, at the forefront of this, making the most money, and of course Australia. Look, I completely back him. In the I don't know, the war for cars, you know, electric cars. Everyone talks about Tesla, but you know, Toyota and Hyundai, they've got all their money on hydrogen, right? So it's pretty much like the AC/DC wars of Tesla and back in the day. So another question here: would it require to move the market in addition to public finance subsidies? Some paper mention requires at least 10 to 20 investor vehicles. So it's definitely got to happen. The move to clean technology is going to happen just because it's probably the greatest of all the technological innovations. It's just a question of timing. Yeah? And political connections and the move by, you know, individual firms to clean technology will happen. It's just a question of whether, you know, some of us will be around to see it, right? Because the consequences of, you know, the difference between 1.5 temperature increase and 3.5, they're exponential.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for all the participants. If there are no further questions, we want to thank you and end the session. It was a very interesting talk, Tom, and I learned a lot from that. So did the audience.
Thank you. Pleasure. Great pleasure. And thanks again to Bala. He's very much an unsung hero.
Thanks, Bala, for making this possible. Yeah. Bye all.
So it's all done.
Yep.
Yeah, and
On time and under budget, Bella. On time and under budget.
yeah, but if I mean, it wasn't, I know that, Tom, the way you speak and the way you present and the way you contribute to the community and the way you contribute to the PhD student, the way you contribute to the mentoring, academics, everything. But today I was behind the scene doing various other things, just running around and moving things. So I was not listening. So I can't say anything, but what I can.
Luckily, Bala, you'll have a recording of this and you can watch it later. If you want to get to sleep overnight, if you're having trouble getting to sleep, you can play the talk and it'll put you straight to sleep.
And first of all, we need to thank you, Tom, so we can do it. I don't think that everyone can clap, only the few people can clap because of the panelists. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and the strong support for.
Thank you so much to the chair, to the very convener, Chandra. Thank you very much. Great job.
Thanks.
You kept us going when we didn't have any questions. It was very good. It was very good.
And thank you, Chandra, and particularly thanks, Sagarika, to make sure that Slido works well.
There are a couple of questions actually that came, so if Tom wants to answer them, or if
of course, yeah,
okay.
Happy to answer any and all questions.
Yeah, I have made it available, so.
Seem to be a lag.
Yes, political answer to have higher ROA and ROE immediately, and then with a lag. We expected all of this to be with a lag, right? Because the channels take time, right, to get the favourable contracts and so on. But the operating performance seemed to happen immediately. But the market performance, because Q is market value on book value. Terry's going to fill me up on that. Q is proxied by market value on book value. So it took a while for the market value to move, right, in China, and that took, it didn't show up until the third year. And now Praveen's got another question. The future, yeah, so that's right. So we can actually go and see, we could study this. As I talked about in the endogeneity talk, we didn't find out that lactic acid was actually the body helping you to sustain your performance, right? We didn't find that out until we went and studied, human anatomy at the molecular level. So it would be good to do. It would be good to go and look at these companies in detail and see, in fact, did they get more contracts and so on, right? That's the equivalent of studying at the molecular level. And I just got a pass mark from Terry. It's very important to me. Thank you, Terry. I just called it Q. Yeah. So Terry is a staunch defender of Tobin's work on what Tobin's Q really is, and he's absolutely right. A lot of people completely distort and mismeasure Tobin's Q. So we call it Q, and it's certainly not the real thing.
So thanks again, Tom. So I think we can wind up this session now because